Welcome to Recalculating Small Business. Like its award-winning book, Recalculating is dedicated to small business in America. Your hosts are Don Mazzella and Dan Perkins.
Dan, here to tell us about the exciting new Q2 MetLife U.S. Chamber of Commerce Small Business Index Survey, and boy, is that a long title, on small business and its optimism, is Tom Sullivan. Tom, first, tell us about yourself. You're Vice President of Small Business, and I lost it because I didn't put it into my notes.
That's all right. You could just call me the small business guy at the U.S. Chamber, and we're
the small business guys on radio. So
excellent.
But how long have you been with the Chamber?
I've been here for a year and a half, been involved with small business policy for about 25 years. Wow.
Well, tell us generally about the survey, what you found, and then after that I'm going to turn it to Dan.
Well, perfect. First of all, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce represents the interests of about 3 million businesses. 96% of those businesses have fewer than 100 employees. About 75% of those businesses have fewer than 10 employees. Our MetLife quarterly small business survey allows for us to really kind of keep our finger on the pulse of Main Street and learn about what's going on Main Street to allow for us to better advocate for small business here in Washington, D.C. And so what we found, the data that was just released today, is that small business optimism continues to go up. And, in fact, their optimism and confidence at a local level is at an all-record high. And so I think the front line number is, 68.7 is where we're at. So 2 out of every 3 small business owners surveyed, and we survey about 1,000 small businesses every quarter, are really at a thumbs-up level for the economy, and that has a tremendous benefit for the economy of the United States.
Well, Dan, there's a lot more to the survey, and I'll leave it up to you.
All right, Dan.
Thank you. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So, here's the question. How much does the survey indicate, and if so, how much this optimism is a function of Mr. Trump?
We don't ask the question specifically, but if you look at any number of data prior to the Trump presidency and during the existing presidency, you'd see that there is a steady trajectory upward from confidence. I think, if you look at control of the government and what does that mean to small business owners, I think the simplest way to put it is that small business owners feel as though the wind is at their back and not in their face. Now, whether people attribute that to this president or not, it's up to them. But the data clearly show optimism on the rise under this administration.
So let's take it one step further. The optimism, give us a sense of, as long as you've been doing this survey, give us a sense of the magnitude of the results, what you have in this Q2 report.
I think the magnitude is, it's kind of a yawner to have a business organization say that businesses are optimistic. What makes this exciting is that Ipsos, these data come from Ipsos, which is an extremely reputable survey firm. They've been producing the Consumer Sentiment Index for over a dozen years. And so the fact that they're the ones reporting this data is what makes it exciting. This isn't simply the business community tooting their own horn. These are actual interviews in a statistically valid sample that show that steady trajectory upward. And that's what makes it remarkable. I mean, when you see at the beginning of this year this sharp spike upward about small business owners' desire to hire and to make more investments, that's one thing. But when you see that the next quarter that we are even 2 points even higher, I mean, that's incredible. And there's a lot in this data, as Don mentioned before. I think one of the things that surprised me was that we know there are headwinds on the workforce front. We know that it's tougher to find, hire, and keep qualified and willing employees. However, the hiring environment in this survey still is very positive. And that actually, for me, as being kind of a small business nerd, that actually is the most surprising news that I found in this survey. And it's very positive. We know those headwinds are out there, but the fact that small business is a little bit insulated is encouraging.
So let me ask you about one thing that we've been hearing pretty consistently since the first of the year. Mm-hmm. And it is a criticism of small business in a sense. And that is that small business doesn't yet know how to deal with the tax bill. We hear that time and time again, that they haven't had time to talk with their accountants or whoever about what are the implications of the tax bill to their business. And I don't know whether you find any concern about the tax bill or what it means, or if it comes in through your survey or not. So the question is there anything in the survey about the tax bills?
So let me take each of those observations in the question one at a time. So first of all, there's nothing specific in this survey that was released this week on the tax bill. Our first quarter showed a sharp uptick in the confidence of the national economy. We believe that spike upwards was specifically related to tax reform. So fast forward to today, there's no specific questions about it, but the fact that the optimism continues to go up, we view as a positive, and the lowering tax rates for business corporations and individuals has something to do with that. Now, you mentioned a criticism, and far be it from me to ever criticize small business, because I actually have the greatest job in the world. I get to advocate for Main Street businesses every day, which is and get paid for it, which is pretty amazing. You asked me about my concerns, and I am in fact concerned that some small business owners have not talked with tax professionals. And it's understandable. I mean, if someone walked up to you on the street and said, "Hey, Dan, you're going to be filing your taxes in April 2019, how are the conversations going with your accountant?" you would laugh. I mean, it's one thing to be thinking about what you're going to be doing for summer vacation in August. It's a whole other thing to be thinking about what types of paperwork you're going to be filing in April 2019. I think my concern is that we have got to break through the silliness of that scenario, and we really have a responsibility to talk with as many small business owners as possible and explain, if you wait until January and February of 2019 to have those discussions with tax professionals, it's too late. There are, in addition to reducing rates across the board, there are many parts of pretty complicated tax changes where small business owners can make decisions now, whether that's new equipment purchases and other types of things where they can end up saving tons of money. And so we are really, really pushing hard to make sure that small business owners know that now is the time to have the discussion so that they can make those reinvestment choices. And we're hearing positive things. I mean, I suspect you hear the same things that I do, but I'm lucky enough to interact with the head of SBA from time to time, Linda McMahon, and she loves telling about this bakery up in Braintree, Massachusetts, where the owner is looked at the tax reform changes, sat down with their accountant. They're buying a new oven, one of those massive ovens for baking bread, and it's because of some of the incentives in the changes. We have a really nice small business owner, Melissa Bercier, from outside of Chicago. She runs a therapy company, and she's calculated some of the savings and pouring that money back into her own employees in order to kind of bolster their morale in her company. And so you hear these examples, whether it's buying a new oven, whether it's increasing benefits for your employees. I think the headlines we see is providing bonuses. There's so much more to it than that. I mean, we see tons of businesses raising wages for their employees so that they can keep those valued employees as long as possible in this tight labor market. All those things are very positive, but it does presuppose the conversations between those small business owners and tax professionals. And so as much as you can advertise on your radio that, have you hugged your accountant today? Maybe that'll get some traction and get those small business owners talking about planning, because only then can you make those good reinvestment decisions.
I've got one more question, then I'll turn it over to Don.
Sure.
One of the issues that we constantly hear about that we didn't hear about before the election and haven't heard about it in years is the unemployment rate is 3.9% nationally. Mm-hmm. Blacks and Hispanics have the lowest unemployment rate they've seen in decades. Some cities and places around the country have an unemployment rate approaching 2%.
Yep.
And we have a situation where we have people, small business people, who came through the previous administration when growth was not a priority, nor growth was ever believed we'd ever get back to 3% GDP, and the jobs that went overseas are never coming back, and America is now a different country. That all changed, I believe, with Mr. Trump. But the challenge seems to be now we are approximately 15 months into Mr. Trump's reign as president of the United States.
Yep.
And Federal Reserve Bank of New York president said that he thought that fourth quarter GDP could be as high as 4.1%. The challenge is if we're plugging along at 3% and we've got a 3.9% unemployment rate, and we're headed towards a 4 or higher GDP, where are the people going to come from to fill the jobs? And so what I've been asking as I talk to people, I've tried to open the door to try and find new people to hire. And that is, why don't you start recruiting from the recent retired? You may be able to get talent at a very attractive price to fit your needs and not necessarily have to have a full-time person. Because I don't know how the small business is going to compete to try and attract in a diminishing supply market as types of new young people to work.
So would it be appropriate for me to simply say amen? I mean, I'd love to hit the button that is like, an applause meter. But I suspect that there would be some dead air in that scenario. But everything you laid out is what we talk about and put our shoulders into at the U.S. Chamber every single day. I think part of the challenge is that in the policy debate, folks talk about some of these policy ideas, and it's made to believe that it would solve all the problems if only we passed this law or this policy, or if a court decision went one way or another. And the truth is, this is a hugely complicated set of issues, and there are so many different things that we've got to focus on that are different for different businesses and for different communities. However, we believe that it all has to be looked at through the lens of growth. And if we are blessed enough to have the 4% GDP, then more and more people have to answer the question of where do we get the workers to satisfy that type of GDP? And retirement age may be part of it. Immigration is part of it. Training is part of it. Wages and benefits are part of it. What we do in middle school and high school is even part of it. There's no one single solution, but more and more people, I think, would benefit from starting exactly where you started, Dan, and that is growth is good, and how do we fuel the growth from an employment perspective? And the more people that are asking those questions, I think the better off we all are from a policy perspective.
Let me, before I turn it back to Don, let me throw in a plug for next week or a show near term. We're going to do something I'm very excited about. We're going to do an interview with a gentleman who has been retired. He was a very successful partner in a Chicago law firm, and he retired about 15 months ago. And he's done stuff in envelopes for nonprofits. He feels like he wants to get to do something, and he's going to talk to us about re-entering the marketplace on his terms. He doesn't want to work full-time. He wants to do projects. He does labor. He does all kinds of things. But we're interested in Jim because we want to find out what went through his mind and why he decided to go back to work and do something where it isn't about money per se. It's about his own psyche and wanting to make a contribution. So that's coming up on a future show.
That is what a great show, and it hopefully will reinforce the reality of small business as well. I mean, my friend Carl Schramm, who used to run a group called the Kauffman Foundation, put a fairly provocative title on a piece in the Wall Street Journal entitled "Older Entrepreneurs Do It Better." And this is a gentleman who is just real savvy with data, and data show that a lot of the older generation make tremendous entrepreneurs for various reasons. Some is getting at the why, giving back on their own terms. Other folks believe that it's just maturity has its benefits, and sometimes we focus all on these young upstarts, but data show that that the golden age of entrepreneurship is actually past 35 years old.
Yeah. Don, back to you.
Well, that's considering my age, that's great to hear. We're talking with Tom Sullivan of the National Chamber of Commerce and his study. But, Tom, I'm going to go in a different direction and ask you, a couple of years ago, we talked about how many people had left the workforce and were no longer looking for a job. What has happened? What has happened to those people? Are they being absorbed back into the workforce? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and this gets at Dan and my conversation a few minutes ago, and that there are so many pieces of the workforce puzzle. One piece that you just correctly identified are those workers who have been out of the employment picture, re-entering. You see some data that show that this optimism that we're reporting on today does lead to more people coming in. I mean, if you're sitting on the sidelines and all of a sudden your team starts winning, chances are you're going to talk with the coach about getting some playing time. And I don't think that's too far-fetched when you see optimism continue to grow. So it is likely we are going to see some new entrants into the workforce, but not really enough to make a dial, to move the dial. And that's where you get into some more tough and challenging questions about disability and folks who are out of the workforce for various reasons, and what types of public policies can incent them to come back into the workforce. And quite frankly, is the workforce designed, or is the workplace designed to accommodate those unique situations? So those are more questions that will be asked, and we hope they are asked in this really tight labor market.
Well, in your survey, you talked about the optimism amongst local small business. Would you go into a little bit of detail on that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm glad you rolled up your sleeve and really got into some of the data. What we see consistently is that small business owners are more confident in the economic environment immediately around them, which in a shorter version is their local economy. And there's various reasons for that. One reason is some of the pessimism of what goes on or what doesn't go on in Washington, D.C., some of the partisan bickering that creates some stalemates. Another reason is because small business owners are successful in large part because of their own drive, their initiative, and their passion. Those are all things under their control. And so that confidence is focused primarily within a sphere they can control. And the further outside of that control, the less confident a small business owner is going to be about an outlook. Now, that flipped on its head on the first quarter. So when we were out in the field talking with small business owners in the December and January timeframe, we saw a huge spike in national confidence. We believe that was primarily because of the passage and enactment of tax reform. Now we're back into what we see as a more reliable source of information for confidence, and that is the question we ask regarding local economy. And so going forward, we're going to be looking at that measure because we ask the small businesses 10 key questions. And one of those questions has to do with the local economy. We believe that is the most effective barometer of small business confidence.
Agreed. I've seen two other surveys, which in both of them they indicated that small businesses on a local level were far more optimistic than they were on the national level. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you saw the same surveys. I can't off the top of my head remember the titles, but I guess my question is people talk about the trickle-down effect. Do you think that's mm-hmm. happening?
I'm not sure what trickle-down you're referring to. I mean, there are a couple. There's the economic trickle-down where larger business gets a big break, and it trickles down to smaller business and ultimately the consumer or employee. There's other trickle-down of movement and bipartisan activity in Washington, D.C., like the passage of Dodd-Frank regulatory reforms that will allow more community banks to lend to small business. That has a policy-related trickle-down that benefits small business and ultimately consumers as well. So I'm not sure which you're referring to, but we see...
You saved me from a bad question. Thank you.
Oh, that's all right. I mean, the blessing of the tax. One of the blessings of the tax reform was that rates came down across the board, and so it's a little bit hard to piece out of that what the lowering of a corporate rate would do to an LLC in a localized environment, because the LLC had lower rates, their rates lowered as well. So it will be difficult to see, and we'll have to look at this, in 2019, because ultimately these tax changes take effect this tax year. And I'm sure there will be stories about one factor being more important than another, but it will be very difficult to piece precisely out which benefits the small business community more. Here at the Chamber, where one of the exciting things about this index is that a rising confidence level, we believe, is analogous to the rising tide lifting all boats. And so we're able to look at some patterns where some confidence goes up higher than others, but to see the overall index going up really does reinforce that age-old expression of a rising tide lifting all boats. And we think that confidence has benefits across the board. Primarily, I'm focused on small business, but when I step back with some of my chamber colleagues, I certainly see that there's a broader economic and community positive from greater small business optimism.
I'm going to let Dan have the final question.
Well, we've already run way over our segment. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Tom Sullivan, can you tell us the website where people can see the study and learn more?
Of course, Don. It's sbindex.us. B is in business. sbindex.us.
Thank you so much for being with us, Tom. It's been illuminating.
Want to know more about health savings accounts for your company or yourself? Go to 2hsa.com and get a free employer's primer. Health savings accounts are a cost-effective way of offering health care benefits to your employees and yourself. HSAs build retirement funds for your employees, improve morale, and reduce your health care benefit cost. For a free employer guide to HSAs, go to 2hsa.com. That's 2hsa.com.
Dan Perkins here from recalculating.biz. I want to tell you about Bob Bethel. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. Dan Perkins with your featured book.
You know, Dan, automation is affecting everybody. It's also, in some cases, scaring people. The fear that a robot or computer could put workers in the unemployment line may be directly related to some physical and mental health issues, says 3 Ball State University researchers. Here to talk about this is Emily Wornell. She's a research assistant professor at Ball State's Indiana Communities Institute. Emily, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Emily, first, before we do anything else, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background?
Sure. So I am a rural sociologist and a demographer. So I largely study population changes in rural communities, but I work with the Indiana Communities Institute and the Center for Business and Economic Research at Ball State, and they hook me into some of these economic studies that they do every once in a while to kind of give a different perspective, a sociological perspective on the economic issues that they're looking at and the impacts on communities and families and households.
Wow, that's a mouthful. What's your academic background? How did you come to this?
So I started out my academic life as a art major. I have my master's of public policy from Oregon State University, and then I did my doctoral work in rural sociology and demography at Penn State University. I'm from a rural community, so I've always been really interested in rural places. I've always really been interested in equality issues, in community vulnerability, and kind of linking that academic research to plausible policy outcomes or policy strategies. And so those are kind of the 2 areas that I get to put together at this position is looking at policy issues and rural voice in policy. So this particular research doesn't have a specific rural component, but a lot of the stuff that we do does.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I'd much rather talk about, and I'd like to get back to it later on in this time with you, about rural life, because I think there's a lot to be said for it, and there's a lot of potential people who seem to be going back to the rural life in droves. But first, I'm going to ask one question about the survey, and then turn it over to Dan. But what are your findings, and what is it, in a nutshell, what are the findings from your survey? Tell us.
So the kind of most important part of this is that, there's been a lot of sociological and economic research that shows that there is a health impact of no-fault job loss. So that's job loss that people experience through things like automation and offshoring. And so this has been well known for quite a while. But what we were able to show is that it's not just the job loss itself that has a negative health impact for workers, but it's actually the fear of job loss. So those negative health impacts start even before the job is lost at all. So that's really the contribution that we're adding here, is that people have some understanding of how automatable jobs are in the economy today, how offshoreable jobs are in the economy today, and that stress in and of itself has a negative health impact for workers.
Okay, Dan, turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's Emily, right?
Yes, that's right.
Good, thank you. I want to make sure I got it right. Emily, we've had a significant number of guests who have been on the show who are in the field of management recruiting and specialty recruiting and finding people. I read on a regular basis that there are areas of the country where the unemployment rate is approaching 2%. 3.9% is the national average. There are, by all accounts, hundreds of thousands of jobs open at the moment and potentially growing all the time. Yet we've come through the 8 years of the previous administration that was communicating to the American people, in essence, our best years are behind us. We will never see 3% gross domestic product again in the country. The jobs that went overseas are never coming back. And so one could compare that to the time when Jimmy Carter was president, when the national psychology was extremely negative. America wasn't the country it used to be. Our lives are changed forever. There's no opportunity. And yet when Donald Trump took over as president under the theme of Make America Great Again, we have seen almost unprecedented resurgence in hiring, manufacturing expansion, jobs being created. So is the results of your study more of rearview mirror reflection of what the company and the country and the people went through over the previous 8 years, as opposed to a forecast of what's likely to happen in the future?
No, I don't think so. And I say that based off of a previous study that we did prior to this one, this one really kind of based itself off of. So we're actually looking at a lot of different correlates to automation and outcomes of automation, particularly because that first study we did was so surprising. And what we found in that first study is that as many as 2/3 of jobs are at a county level are vulnerable for being automated in the future. And a political and social discussion that we've been having for quite a while, and an economic discussion that we've been having for a while, is that the risk is really in offshoring. But what we found is that that's just not true. The vast majority of the risk is actually found in automation, and that even though there has been job loss over the last couple of decades, the last decade in particular, due to both offshoring and automation, we're really at the beginning of that trend, not at the end of that trend. And so certainly, you know, the economy goes up and down, the labor market goes up and down from year to year. But what we're really interested in is looking at that trend over time. And we're fairly confident, although we could never estimate how quickly this is going to happen, we are fairly confident that the level of automation losses that we'll be seeing in jobs in the economy in the next generation, at least, is that those losses are going to be likely greater than the losses that we've seen in the past. Now, that isn't to say that automation isn't also going to create jobs. And so that is certainly something that is pretty impossible at this point to be able to guess what new technological advancement will create. But that's certainly something that always happens is if you have technological advancement that automates some jobs, it means that it creates other jobs. But what we're interested in... Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, Emily, are there certain kind of jobs or industries that are more vulnerable to this influence of automation than others?
Sure, yeah. So jobs that are highly repetitive, so kind of some of those stereotypical jobs that you think of being automatable. So jobs that don't require, quote unquote, high skill level. But even some customer service types of jobs are at risk of being automated, and certainly some, food service and food preparation. There are some jobs in the medical field that are at risk of being automated, and what we find in that previous study that I mentioned is that it's jobs where people with lower levels of educational attainment are concentrated. Those are the jobs that are at the highest risk of being automated, and those are also the jobs where people make the least amount of money, which we've seen in a couple of different studies that we've been doing. So it's people who have fewer transferable skills that already in their arsenal to be able to go to a new job when their old job gets automated. They have less kind of economic flexibility in terms of being able to be, unemployed for a certain amount of time. And then really the interest, the concern, both for this health study and these other studies that we've been doing, are the long-term effects of layoffs due to non-performance-based reasons like automation or offshoring. And even if a person who loses their job due to automation is to get rehired, some of those health effects that we're seeing even before they lose their job in the first place really persist for decades over the rest of the lifetime of the worker. So mortality rates of people who are laid off early or who are laid off due to things like automation are elevated for at least 20 years. There's a higher rate of being hospitalized. There's a higher rate of cardiovascular disease and depression and suicide. And all of those things happen for an extended period of time, even in the face of gaining a new job after layoff.
So it's, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, so I'm listening
Sure.
very carefully to what you were saying. It sounds like what you're saying is that these are relatively entrance-level jobs as opposed to highly skilled level jobs. Not that highly skilled people don't get laid off, but
Sure.
when you talked about so much about the lack of skill level, the lack of training. Are you talking about entry-level jobs based on education or skill level are the most vulnerable?
I don't know that I would necessarily just say entry-level jobs. I would say highly repetitive jobs and low lower skill jobs. So some of those are going to be entry level for sure, but some of them are not necessarily entry level.
So I want to go a little bit of a different direction. I want to go out in space a little bit. Don has works on the National Robotics Foundation about helping people understand the value of robots. But let me tell you what I think. While your research is extremely important and very insightful, let me tell you what I think might be a bigger issue, and you may be addressing it. We just haven't asked you the question to address it, and that is AI, or artificial intelligence. It seems to me that the expansion of artificial intelligence has the potential to go after highly skilled jobs too. And in science, in engineering, in construction, in manufacturing, in design, computers may have the ability to replace humans in even some highly skilled jobs. I mean, we have now surgeries in hospitals that are being performed not by doctors, but by robotic arms under doctors. So how do you feel about the impact of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think certainly there is that potential. I mean, even those jobs, like you mentioned, the surgeon, some of their tasks being taken over by AI, and even those positions that we think of as being kind of uniquely human, that you have to have a human touch for, or something like that. We are seeing automation of a lot of those jobs. Another example is that I heard of recently. You know, you used to have nurses who would have to come in to hospital rooms and rotate people so that they wouldn't get bed sores if they were in a bed for a long time. And there are beds that do that essentially now. You know, so even those things that we expect need a human touch don't necessarily need a human touch. And so I think that yes, that potential is there for those higher skilled positions, and that's something that, again, is really, it's hard to estimate how quickly those technologies will become widespread. The other kind of flip side of that, though, is whether or not the people, higher skilled workers, if there's a differential impact on higher skill and lower skill workers in terms of being able to find positions afterwards, and in the amount of resources that are available for them to kind of cope and deal with being laid off. And what we see in a lot of higher skill positions is that they already have those transferable skills that are going to be needed and wanted in either other jobs that aren't automatable or in other jobs that are created because of technological advancement. What we see with lower skill workers is they're less likely to have those transferable skills, and so there's been this big push of retraining folks, but the concern is whether or not we're retraining them into positions that are also going to be automated in the next 20 years.
Did you participate in developing the first survey, or just the second one?
Yes, yeah. So I participated in the first research study as well.
So let me ask you, because I want to get it back to Don. What changed between the first survey and the second survey? Second question: how has it affected the way you're teaching, or if you're doing consulting with outside clients, how has that affected what you say to them?
In terms of the health survey or the health research, or I guess I don't exactly understand your question.
You did a survey before, and now this is survey number 2. And so what I'm asking is, what changed that struck you as important, if anything, between the first and second survey?
Sure.
And how has it affected your life as an academic in what you're trying to teach to your students or perhaps to corporate clients?
Yeah, sure. So those are really good questions. So first, just a point of clarification is that we're not actually conducting a survey. We're using secondary data. So this is a research study using some economic and some social data. So that's an important distinction. But I think the big kind of takeaway from this second piece is that the impact that we might be expecting from something like automation, it's actually, even though we might not be experiencing those high rates of automation today, just the anticipation of that happening means that there is an impact on the workforce already, and it's a measurable impact that has financial consequences both for the workers and for the employers themselves. And so when we talk about it, we talk a lot about kind of workforce development and workforce training and stuff. But I also think that employers need to recognize if they have employees that are in highly automatable positions, that there may need to be some sort of action in their job place of work right now to help lessen the stress or the anxiety of the position being automated in the future, and maybe that means some kind of forward-thinking training in terms of, okay, so these jobs are going to be automated. Let's go ahead and already start training workers into these other jobs that won't be automated. That has the potential to lower the stress, which has the potential to lower the negative health outcomes, and then lower the expense to both workers and to employers. So I think the big takeaway for me, and what I talk about when I talk to policymakers and community leaders, is to be thinking really long term. These are not immediate, like short-term issues with immediate short-term consequences. These are incredibly long-term consequences that we actually can see multi-generational consequences from these from high automation, and just recognizing that it happens before people even lose their job, I think is a really important realization, just because it makes that process an even longer term prospect.
Good. John, back to you.
Well, first off, we were talking with Emily Wornell. She's a research assistant professor at Ball State College. It's a fascinating study. I'm hesitating because our board is acting up again. Emily, if people want to know more about your study and about you, where do they go?
Sure. So all of our studies that we put out are on the CBER website. It's the Center for Business and Economic Research at Ball State University. And we have a publications website. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to pull up that website right now so I can give it to you if you want it.
Absolutely.
It is cms.bsu.edu/academics. cms.bsu.edu.
A link to that will be on our website tonight. Emily, I have a lot more questions, and we're going to invite you back when our board is not acting up, and we want to talk about the rural world today, because I think it's very important.
Yes, I would love to chat with you about that. I also think it's very important.
No, because for many reasons. But today, the board simply is not acting properly. And
fair enough.
You have another meeting to go to, so we're going to say thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You know, Dan, I've been dealing with diabetes my entire life. My grandmother had it, my mother and all my aunts had it, and unfortunately I have it. Had adult onset of diabetes for over 20 years. And medical science is making terrific progress in helping people understand how to prevent it, and if it does onset, how to control it. And you have some interesting information that you want to share with our audience. So
first thing I want to share is that about a week ago or so, I was also diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic, and I only have one person that I know of in my family, and that's my brother. My two sisters do not have any diabetes, but it was a scary thing to learn because when you go to the diabetes classes at the hospitals and they start talking about all the things that can happen to you with diabetes, it's a serious disease, and you can only treat it. You cannot cure it. And it really shook me up, forced me to decide to want to learn more about the disease that I had. And I found some startling information. America diagnoses 1.3 Americans every year, new patients of diabetes. We have over 30 million, almost 10% of the entire population of the United States is diagnosed as having diabetes. And the scary part is about 30% of the people who have it have not yet been diagnosed. And you were talking about diet. That's the one thing that I'm getting used to. But as I talked to the dietitians who were teaching the classes, the incidence of adult diabetes happening into children is exploding, and the number of children in the United States that are obese and who are already now being treated not very often in the case of type 1, which is insulin dependent, but there's just an enormous number of people that are being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And right now, they estimate if you're over 65 years of age, 1 in 4 senior citizens in this country will be or have diabetes, and they expect it to grow. What I found was that it was very difficult. I was bombarded with so much information over 3 nights, 3.5 hours each night. I couldn't absorb it all. And so I really felt that it was important to me to get my own education. And I'm a very task-oriented person. And I started doing my testing, and we got all these parameters. And you take it 2 hours after a meal, and then you take it before exercise and after exercise, and you take it before you go to bed, and then first thing when you wake up in the morning. And I had great numbers after breakfast and the rest of the day, but I wake up in the morning with numbers that are not acceptable, and I've been extremely frustrated, if you would, of trying to deal with how to get those morning numbers down. So you and I had started talking to these people at Barton Publishing last fall before I was even diagnosed as a diabetic. And they have a diabetes kit, which is an instructional kit. It's done electronically. It's made in 6 sections. And we entered into an agreement with them to, because it's such an important national health issue, to promote their diabetes kit on our program and make it available through our website. So they're really addressing the 6 major issues that people have to be concerned about: diet and exercise, medicine, and a bunch of other things, so that in one easy-to-read place, you get an opportunity to figure out how you can begin to manage your diabetes.
Well, there's so much conflicting information out there. Not so much, I think, conflicting as everybody has their own particular way of doing things. That's why I found the book extremely helpful. I've been dealing with it for over 20 years, and as you know, I talk about it at national conventions and on radio and TV, my own journey. But what I found in the book interesting is that they talk about things that I've only discovered along the way, some of which I wish I had discovered when I first became diabetic. My mother had diabetes, so the chances were 3 out of 4 that I would end up with diabetes. And
you said that your aunts had it too, and your grandmother?
Oh, well, yeah. As far back as they could go. My grandmother was an immigrant to this country, so they have no knowledge of before that of her family. But my mother was, in fact, for all intents and purposes, died of diabetes, as did one of my aunts. The complications of diabetes. But for instance, one of the things that I wish I had learned much earlier, and I have to thank my wife for this, is how important it is to walk, how important it is to be out there at least, some people say 2 or 3 miles a week. Other people say doesn't matter the distance as long as you do it every day. And the material that we're talking about, that's why you and I are pushing this so much, is because we do know the consequences of not properly treating diabetes. Is the fact that if not properly treated, there are complications, amputation of limbs. It's funny, whenever I go to my doctor, who is absolutely one of the best internists in New York City, what does he do? He goes down and he takes off my socks and checks my circulation, because that's a key element in determining what's going on with diabetes. And then again, it's the pills versus insulin and other medical remedies. I myself have not, on the occasion when I've been in the hospital, reacted very well to diabetes, to insulin. And I take pills, a combination of 8 pills a morning and 3 at night, which keeps my A1C, which is, by the way, the measure of an important thing to consider. The 4 byproducts of diabetes are 1, high sugar, 2, high cholesterol, 3, high blood pressure, and 4, poor circulation. Those combination of things are what kill a goodly percentage of people. As someone once said, diabetes is a disease you can't cure, but will eventually kill you if you're not careful. I go back to you there, and I can talk for an hour on the subject.
I understand. I think that the thing that shocked me the most when they told me that I was a type 2 diabetic, and as I went through all the classes and they talked about the things that you just mentioned about that can go wrong and how it can affect your longevity, I came really face to face with my own mortality, and I hadn't dealt with that before, and it was very disturbing for me. But I've settled down, and I think this program is helping me, and we hope that will help our listeners. So we're going to put a link on recalculating.biz where you can click on and go and take a look at the package, and it can be downloaded directly to your phone or your computer in an electronic file. You don't have to wait for a book to be delivered. So we thought it was an important issue, and we're spending our airtime helping you understand why it's important to get control of your health. So this is Dan Perkins.
And Don Mazzella.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us on Recalculating. We hope the information you received on today's episode was helpful to you in starting and growing your business. Please go to our website, recalculating.biz, to contact us, to listen to past shows, and see special offers. Until next time, remember, if you grow, we grow. Join us next week for more helpful ideas to make your business a great success. Recalculating, a program designed to help you be successful.